everyone, welcome back to She Blurs Podcast. Today's guest is Rachel. Hi, Rachel.
Hi.
Thank you so much for being a guest on my podcast today.
Anytime. I'm so happy to be here with you.
So can you tell our listeners when you first realized you wanted to be an author?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So I was a school counselor for a while, which now I feel really old. That was back when I was like 21, 22. And I would write in order to it was almost like my own personal journal that I would have in order to get out like all the feelings inside. And so I never really actually realized I wanted to be a writer until then. But I was one of those writers that I had no concept of chapters or formatting or just anything. So I was like, I'm just going to write this super long book and just keep writing it almost like a journal. And so that's kind of how I started writing. And about 3 years into that, I started writing full time. But it was kind of like a happy accident, but I'd always made up stories growing up, like constantly played dress up and all that kind of fun stuff with my sisters. So I feel like storytelling was always part of my life. I just didn't realize how it would transfer into like being an actual career.
That's awesome. So you took your book to a publisher and they published it and you became a full-time writer? Like your very first one? Or wow.
So I always tell people like, do not look at my story and think like this is normal, because it's 100% not normal. Like it is. I remember being at a conference being like, please don't take this and write notes and be like, that's how you do it. That's so not how you do it, especially this day and age. No, I took it to an indie publisher at that time. That was right when Amazon was really just like breaking out with indie authors, like back in 2011. And so there was a ton of indie publishers, like at most romance or like book conventions, that's what you saw, right? So an indie publisher took a chance on me. And then the second book that I published with them hit USA Today, which again, that does not normally happen. So don't take that, again, don't take notes. It was God's blessing and it was good timing in the market. It's nothing that I did, quite honestly. So yeah, that's kind of how that all started. And then I was actually working as a manager because I had quit my other job and was working because I had my MBA, and I was like, I'm going to go do this. And worked as a manager and just was miserable because I was working like 12-hour days trying to write in breaks and stuff. And I came home just bawling, and my husband was like, we're going to make it. We're going to be okay. Like, I'll go take up another job. And at the time I'd had 3 jobs at the same time. So we were like, we'll figure it out. And I quit right after that. And then somehow it just took off.
Wow, that's amazing. Wow. Wow. So what does your family think about your writing? Like, has any of them read all of your books or any of your books, and have they given you good feedback?
So my grandma, weirdly enough, so one of my bestselling books, The Bet, is based off of my grandma Nadine, and who has passed a couple of years ago. Because she was always like putting on every day. She always said, Rachel, you always put on lipstick. You put on lipstick for your husband, and you do it for your family. You always put on lipstick no matter what, even if you don't feel like it. And like, that was like her big thing. And so like, I wrote a book based off of that. It was like a family saga story, like contemporary romance. And so she would travel with me, she would travel literally with me to book signings. Wow. And like the biggest part, she'd be like grabbing her margarita, running around for a little. I was like, oh my gosh, like she was the best at 80 something. And so she was like my biggest support. I remember her being in Vegas, just like sitting in her little swimsuit, with her little drink, with her giant sunglasses on, just like reading romance novels. Like, that's what I want to be. Like, that's why I want to go out right there. So she was always a huge supporter. My family always has been. And then my dad, he's a huge supporter, but he only likes my like mafia ones and then my paranormal, because they're more like suspenseful. And he's like, and then when there's those scenes, I just skip those pages. I'm like, okay. I also have 2 kids. I'm like, you know how those kids happen, but it's cool. You can skip those pages.
That's funny. It's great to have those support, like especially your grandmother. And I'm sorry for your loss. Oh man, grandmothers are dear.
They're the best.
Yes. So can you tell our listeners a little bit about what inspired your newest release, Broken Crown?
Yeah, so it's actually it's kind of crazy how we're talking about this, like the beginning of like my writing career and the end, because the end. I'm not ending, guys. I'm sorry, that sounded horrible. The end of this series, that's what I'm trying to say. So I started this Mafia series back in 2011, and it's basically high school bully romance, or college bully romance is what it was back in the day, when that really wasn't a thing yet, right? Like it was kind of like newish. And I just really wanted to write a mafia story about these kids that like took over this university and the 5 families in Chicago. I did a deep dive into like mafia and like research. And I got into like 13, 14 books. And then I was like, people are not going to want to invest in that many. And also that's just a lot. So I did a spinoff and I did a kids series of the original, like the OG elite people, like their kids, and like how would they raise their kids in the same circumstances of the 5 families, like ruling Chicago, having a ton of money, owning this university, still bully romance, all that kind of stuff. And so Broken Crown was inspired by all of that. It's the final book in the series. So it's kind of like the end of an era, a series that is now, including the spinoffs, over 26 books, I want to say.
Wow.
Yeah, and King's story is really different because I typically don't do a lot of love triangles, but his is about falling in love with someone, or knowing you start off with him being engaged and stuff. And basically it's Kingarthur. So like it's based off Kingarthur. So Guinevere, Lancelot, Kingarthur, like that love triangle. So he is in Kingarthur, which is King, is in love with her, and then Lancelot is her bodyguard, mafia bodyguard. And so basically Kingarthur, Broken Crown King, he has 7 days with his wife before he basically gives her off to the man that he thinks she actually loves. But during all this, the guy that loves her has to like watch them basically fall in love. So it's a really like weird love triangle, but it's all modernized. It's all contemporary mafia. And it's basically King, his rise to like the mafia throne, becoming the capo de capi, which would be like the godfather of the 5 families in Chicago. So it's fun. He's young, so it's a really fun romance because he's like 22 in it, but really just like rises up, and there's a lot of fun, sexy times, lots of drama, lots of angst. This is probably the first book I've had in a couple of years where like I couldn't stop crying after chapter 2, and I'm like, oh no. So, but it's just because when you like every character, you're like, what do I do? Who do I like? What do I, so yeah. So this is the end of an era, but there's going to be more later. But yes, that's King's story.
Ooh, yeah, I love it. I love it. I was going to ask you who's your favorite character in this book and why.
I tell you. No, I love King. He's probably one of my favorite characters I've ever written. Every single story was based off of either a book or a concept. So like the book before this was based off of Dr. Jekyll and Hyde, which I know sounds weird and creepy, but it really isn't, I promise. And this one, same thing. I started writing it and I was like, oh my gosh, this is Kingarthur and the Round Table, like this concept. And so everything starts with like a quote from them and stuff. So King, whenever you see like someone rise up like to like power where they're having to sacrifice everything for it, I think is a really kind of romanticized, cool thing, especially when the women next to them are just as powerful. And that's really the entire series that I've done is the women have always been equal to the men. Like they've always been even more so than the men. And that's really what I like a message I wanted to send, that like, you don't have to like fall in love and let him rescue you. Why don't you rescue him? And that's kind of how all of these books go. And that's really King's story is she comes up and basically rescues him in his time of need. And I think that's sexy to me, but that's also how we should be empowered as romance writers.
Ooh, I love that concept. I really do, because I haven't read a book like that to where the woman is. Yeah, I've never read a book like that. So that's really great.
Now you know. No, I think that's really important. It's an important message to send to everyone who's, grabbing romance books. Like, I started reading when I was like, 16, 17, like romance novels. I read a lot of great ones, but I wish I would have read more where it was women empowerment. And so I think it's really important to have that message there.
Yeah, that's true. Oh, I do have a question outside of the question I was going to ask you, but what is your favorite romance book novel?
My favorite. Oh my gosh. Okay. So you can ask me this because I literally, you're going to think I'm crazy. Like or at least before I had my 15-month-old, I used to read like 5 to 7 books a week.
Oh, wow.
Never in the same genre, like always in a different genre, because I don't want to read what I write. But my favorite one I've read, and I would say since high school, is Redeeming Love by Francine Rivers. But I like it. It's about a prostitute and a guy that is a prostitute. This sounds crazy again. And he keeps like fighting for her, even though she keeps going back to this old life because that's all she knows. And it's like and they made a movie out of it. It's like a movie that literally came out, I want to say about 5 months ago. So it's like been blockbuster, done well. And it's by Francine Rivers, and she is just such an incredible writer, and I've read all of her books, and that's probably one of my favorite books, just because I liked the concept of them both being, again, equally strong, but this guy, like, constantly, no matter how much she messed up, no matter what she did, no matter what he did, coming after her. And I remember there's like this scene where she's so bare to him, she literally just, like, he's a farmer, so she walks up to him and just drops, and it's a historical, she drops all her clothes and is like, here I am, like, all of me, scarred, like, here I am. And I was like, that is so, yeah, that's just so amazing. So yeah, one of my favorites.
What book is this? What is this book called again?
You would love it. It's called Redeeming Love. It's one of my favorite books. You would love it. It is. It's a big book, though. That's the one I always tell people, like, I'm so sorry that I just sent you a book that is but no, she's a very talented author. She's been around for a very long time, probably since Nora Roberts. Like, she was, you know, she's the OG, but her books are incredible.
Ooh, I'm gonna check that. That does sound steamy. And you said it's a movie now?
It's a very steamy.
I'm gonna check that out.
It's weirdly a Christian romance at the same time, which sounds really weird, but, like, it's like it all ties in. I can't explain it. Yes, you just need to grab it.
I'm definitely So can you tell our listeners how you develop the characters and traits for them in your books?
Yeah, so for the recent ones, like, quite honestly, like, I'm one of those writers that I let the characters decide for me. And I always wonder, do people think I'm losing it because I'm like, I can't start this unless I have, like, all my music, and then once I have that down for, like, every chapter, then I can go in. And a lot of times, even right now as I'm writing, I'm like, come on, Rachel, like, I started it and I was like, yep, that took a turn. That took a turn for But a lot of times it's because that character comes in and they're like, yeah, that's not going to happen. We're going to do this instead. And I'm like, cool. We're going to do that instead. Sounds good. And so it's almost like I'm just, like, watching a movie and I get to press pause, rewind, play. And that's always how it's been for me. Like, I can't explain it other than it's like watching a movie. And so developing them isn't really the issue. It's just letting them have that power and that freedom. And I feel like you can always tell when authors don't do that. When you're reading a book, you're like, yeah, it was good. But that's what you say, like, it was good. Like, you want them to be like, no, that changed my life, or that was amazing, or why did they do this, or why do I hate them so much? And that's usually why you get bad reviews, right? Like, they hate the characters, they hate this. And I'm like, yeah, but that's humans. Like, that's us. That's how we live. And so I kind of give them the freedom to be, like, the worst possible people on the planet or the best. And my whole goal is always to redeem them. But I think it's important to give them that freedom because you're telling a story and you're hopefully helping people in that process, even if it's romance. You know what I mean?
That's true. And I did want to ask you a question, like, along the lines of developing your characters. How do you start out your book? Like, with me, I'm trying to write my first novel, but my head is all over the place. So people's like, you can start in the middle, you can start at the end, you can come back to the beginning. I'm like, how do people do that? Because my mind is so scattered. Like, I just can't do it.
It's really hard. Like, and my first recommendation is don't write in Microsoft Word. You do that at the end when you're doing edits. Get Ulysses. It's an amazing writing program, and it makes it to where, and you can do, like, a 20-minute tutorial on YouTube. It's really easy. I had another author friend be like, you need this because there's no tabs, no editing, no formatting, nothing. You just write, right? And then when you're done with the chapter, you do, like, next page, and you can click it on the left-hand side, and then you can insert pages. You can move stuff around on the left-hand side. So it makes it so freaking easy because you could be laying in bed at night going, this should have happened. You run to your little computer and you just type in a little note and do new page, insert. Again, you just move it. You don't have to say insert. You just do this. I'm showing, right, with my hand. And it's there. And, like, what I do is whenever I do a new book in it, I say first draft, and then underneath it, I put a style sheet. So any notes that I have, I put in my style sheet. And even if it's, like, stuff that I've deleted or, like, words that I'm like, oh, I don't know if I like this paragraph, I don't know if I like this, I put it all there. So I always have it saved. So I can always look back when I'm writing. And all I have to do is literally click on it. And it's just all there. It's the easiest program to use. And it makes it so easy for writers, especially first-time writers, to go back and be like, because you don't know, maybe you like to write linear, and that's totally okay. But a lot of people like to add in different chapters. And I've noticed for me, like, I like to write linear, but then sometimes I come back in and I'm like, oh man, I should have added this in there, but it doesn't really fit. Maybe I should move this up here. And that's totally okay. And I think in Word, that's really hard to do. I know it's really hard to do because you're always messing up the formatting when you do that. And then you're confusing yourself. Then where are your notes? And then you don't want to turn on review because then you have notes on the side and it messes that up. So that is the easiest way, I think, to do it, unless you honestly just have like handwritten notes. You know, that takes forever because I can type way faster than I can taking handwritten notes. So that's what I would say. And I would decide, the other thing would be like, if you're writing your first book, my suggestion would never to be actually to write out of order. I would say write what you want to write, take notes somewhere else, and then if you want to add them in, or other chapters, but go linear because revisions are normal, right? You're always going to go through at least 3 edits. So you can always add those in. There's always suggestions editors are going to give you, and you can be like, cool, actually I already had this. And like right now I'm writing a pilot, and I had sent in all my stuff to my script writer, and he was like, don't delete. He's like, I don't want this in the script right now. He's like, but you never know what's going to happen on episode 2. You never know what's going to happen on episode 3. He's like, so don't delete it. Let's just save it. And I think that's probably the easiest way to get stuff done. I hope that makes sense.
It does. It does. It makes a lot of sense. Like I feel like I got this.
You
like
got
with you,
always, you
with
can
everybody.
send me an email.
I definitely will. So I have a question. What scene resonated with you the most on a personal level?
From Broken Crown? Oh my gosh. So there was a scene where you think a character is dying, but you're not sure. And all of the like badass mafia guys kind of start walking into the room, and you see like the main guy, King, sitting on the ground, and he knows like it's not good. And they pull him into their lap, and they start singing a hymn to him. And it sounds really like opposite because you're like, it's mafia, what do you mean? Like, but they're just like trying to comfort him, and it's like his best friend then just tells him like it's time to rise up and like take up the sword, is what he says basically. And he has to go and like do that. And I'm like, what a powerful moment that all these men and these women too are in there that are so powerful and they're so rich and they have everything and they've been around blood all their lives, can come in and just still have like that vulnerability. And it's one of the scenes that like almost in every review I've seen of the book, people are like, couldn't stop crying, had to like sit out for a minute. And I'm like, yes, that's one of my ever. I love that. I love the vulnerability of people that you would never expect to be like that, to suddenly like kind of switch and just be like, but I have a heart and I'm here for you. Because I think that's the whole point of this entire series I've written is family, loyalty, blood in, no out. Like that's been the catchphrase for 10 years. And I think that's super important to come across. And I love that this being the, younger generation, they still understand the concept of family and loyalty and friendship.
I love it. I love it. I can't wait to read it. I can't wait. I can't wait. So I wanted to talk about your books that are coming soon, your upcoming books. It's 100 Dark Nights, is that right? And that's not right?
No, you're right.
It is?
You're good.
and the Godparent Trap. So can you tell us, our listeners, a little bit about those two that's coming out?
Yeah. So 1001 Dark Nights is it's another K-pop book, because I'd written a K-pop book. I'm like, when did it release? Back in December, and it's the one that got for TV, which is really exciting. It's K-pop drama, and this is kind of like a spin-off of that, and it's with the anti-fan. I think it's the anti-fan. We changed the title twice, so I'm like, what is it called again? But it's about the girl that hates this one K-pop idol and then ends up joining their group as a boy-girl, which is typically not done. I think it's only been done like once or twice in like Korean music. And so it's about her and like this love triangle with her and these two guys that are in the group with her. And it's like a bully romance too. So that's coming out in July. And then I think it was actually June is Godparent Trap. And Godparent Trap is a traditional book with Grand Central that is about these two people that hate each other. They end up having to live together after they lose. He loses his sister. She loses her best friend in a car accident. And so it's a kind of like a different play on a 90s rom-com. I remember watching about them having to take in the kids and live together and like parent. And the guy is like this really like stuck up his ass like accountant, and she's like this free spirit blogger that just loves life and doesn't know how to cook and is just like, what? You know? And so it's like them, it's, you know, oil and water getting put together in like a chaotic situation with kids under the age of 5, which like, I'm like, me and my husband can cook and I'm still like, oh my gosh, we're going to DoorDash. Like, this is ridiculous. So like, so I can understand that concept. And so it's a really fun and lighthearted, but also like, you know, also kind of sad in some areas, like a romantic comedy about these two people that come together and obviously fall in love. And I'm really excited about it. I've been working on it for 2 years because COVID and everything. So like, and the edits got pushed back because everyone's edits got pushed back. So I'm excited. Yeah. It finally has a release date and it's finally coming.
I love it. I can't wait to read those too. I love the covers of all of your books. I'm like, these are cute covers. But, I do have one last question. So let me ask it. I forgot it because I'm like looking at your book covers. I'm like, so are any of these series, like the 2 books that's coming out, are those series?
They're all actually. So like the anti-fan K-pop one, totally a standalone. And so is the Godparent Trap. So actually the rest of the year I have nothing but standalone series. So and that's kind of why I ended Broken Crown the way I did with the Mafia Royals, because I really wanted, I haven't had a standalone, like any standalones probably in 7 years. And so I was like, I should probably do that. Should probably come back, finish off my series and do that, because I have a tendency to think I'm going to write a standalone. Sorry, I keep getting stupid messages. I have a tendency to want to do that. And then I fall in love with like a secondary character. And then I'm like, we should write his book too. And then I do. And then like, that's how I did it with my paranormal. I'm like, how are we in 8 books now? Like, I don't even understand this concept, but that's just my life right now. So I'm trying really hard this year just to do standalones. So yes. And I will say that my series all are standalone within a series, but it's one of those things that I think it's more enjoyable if you start at the beginning. So I just think, because then you know the characters, even though I do like a whole rundown at the beginning, it's just easier. So yeah, the rest of the books that we've been talking about will be standalones.
Nice. I can't wait. And my last and final question before I let you go. So when you write your books, do you write a lot of books at once? Like, do you have like one project here, one project here, one project here? Like, do you do like that, or do you work on one book at a time? Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. Like, I actually class on this. No, I write multiple books at a time, and I say that, and I do that only because I think it is smart to not have writer's block. And so a lot of people will sit with a manuscript and they're like pounding their head against their computers, deleting everything they wrote, rewriting it, deleting it, rewriting it, deleting it. And I'm like, the way to get out of that rut is to have, maybe I'm writing a rom-com, but then over here I'm writing a normal, and then over here I'm writing a historical, like whatever. And typically that's what I do. And it makes you a faster writer, which is great. But it also makes it where you're not sitting there staring at your screen with like your eyes bleeding, trying to figure out where to go next. Because whenever I get stuck in whatever I'm writing in, I just close it out and I open up a different tab and I'm like, we're going to start this. And I think a lot of writers too, like so many of us have manuscripts we've never finished, right? And I'm like, well, rather than never finishing them and having like 27 over here to the left that you could have just written, why don't you just work on 3 at a time? And then that way those are coming out too, and you have more books coming out, but also like you're not getting stuck writing something that's making you want to like run into the wall and then come back to the other one. Like then maybe that night you have a dream, or like the next day you're like, oh, this is what I should have done. And you get inspired. So I just think there's a lot of wisdom in it. And it sounds like it does sound like weird, and it's not like you're writing a billion words in a day. It's just trying to it's a palate cleanser. That's what I call it. It's a palate cleanser. It's kind of like reading genres, you know, like sometimes I read alien romances and so I'm like, this is crazy and random and fun. And then sometimes I'm reading paranormal and I'm like, this is cool. Like, it's just something to kind of get your brain going. And I think that's the smartest way to do it.
That's true. That's true. So I want to thank you so much, Rachel, for coming on my podcast today and chatting with me.
Of course. I'm glad we finally got this.
Yeah. You have a great day.
You too. Thank you. Bye.
You're like a circle that floats around me, keeping me safe and sound. And when I fall, you've tied a rope to me.